Hello, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Douglas Johnson. I am a yoga teacher at the advanced 500-hour level, also an ordained minister, kirtan artist, musician, amongst other things. Today I wanted to speak a little bit about the symbol of the lotus as a symbol of enlightenment. This is used in several traditions, and there's a good reason for the use of the lotus. And I wanted to talk about that today. But before I get into this talk, as usual, I need to thank the community that makes these talks possible. This is a community effort, and the community is my Mahapatha Yoga community on Patreon. So they contribute monthly, and they allow me to set aside time and resources to make these talks and provide them free of charge without any kind of paywall to the community out there on YouTube. So if you're interested in becoming part of that community, please check out the links below, and you can also just leave a one-time tip if you like. All right, so the lotus. There's a saying, no mud, no lotus. What is this about? Well, I don't know if you know much about lotuses, but the lotus is a flower that floats on the top of a lake or a body of water, and it's very pretty. There's lots of petals on it, and if you could see, it actually, the stem goes all the way down into the mud at the bottom of the pond or the lake. And so while the lotus is this really beautiful flower sitting on top of the water, that's what you see. Underneath, it's coming out of mud or murk. I don't know if you've ever swam in a pond or a small lake, but there's mud at the bottom. It's very squishy and icky, and there are usually things like bloodsuckers and other critters that live in that mud. So, you know, as human beings, not the most inviting thing to step your foot in that. Probably rather avoid it. I probably would. So the lotus is this very interesting flower. It grows out of that murk and mud at the bottom of the lake. And then it produces this wonderful, beautiful flower. So I'll just mention that usually, metaphorically, according to Joseph Campbell anyway, the water usually represents the unconscious or the subconscious. So we have this beautiful flower, it's floating on top of that, and it's, you know, it's representing enlightenment for us as human beings. So we have the unconscious there. This is floating on top of the unconscious, and then its roots go down into this really murky, nasty, seemingly opposite, right? It seems like the opposite of this beautiful flower, this murk where there's bloodsuckers and, you know, creatures and things, creepy crawly stuff. You step your foot in it, it feels gross. So this is used for a reason. It's not just because the lotus is pretty that it was chosen to represent enlightenment. Lots of flowers are pretty. So this one is chosen for a very specific reason, because it grows out of this murk or this mud. It was selected for that very reason. So again, no mud, no lotus. Well, what does this mean for us as human beings? Well, where is our mud? As a human being, where is your mud? That's really the question that we need to ask. Now, what I find is people very often are asking about how to get away from their mud, how to escape their mud. Oh, I feel sad. What do I do about it? I'm depressed. What do I do about it? I feel anxious. What do I do about it? Whatever it might be. They're very often looking to spirituality to sort of solve their problems because they may have heard stories of someone who overcame depression or anxiety or health issues or other things using spirituality or by following a spiritual path. And indeed, these things do happen. But what I'm hoping to explore today with you is that I think the answer, really long term, is in planting your roots in the mud, like the lotus. We are generally saying, okay, I want to uproot, I want to get out of this mud and then produce this beautiful lotus. So again, we might think, well, I'm going to go to an ashram, or I'm going to divorce this person and have a more peaceful relationship, or whatever it might be. We are usually trying to escape the mud. That's what I hear. That's what I see most of the times. How do I get away from this feeling that I don't like? But in my experience with deep spirituality, that isn't really the way. That's sort of the wrong question to be asking. We will generally suffer because we are resisting something. And that something is probably the mud. It is something that is unconscious, right? It's down there under the water, okay? You might even say it's subconscious. So deep down there, we have these things that are not in awareness, that are controlling us, that make us feel certain things. And when we feel certain things, we often are driven to do things, to make choices, to take action. And we often aren't willing to be with the mud, not fully. We are trying to get away from the mud. So again, what many of us are trying to escape the mud, but then grow this lotus of enlightenment. Well, I just don't think that that's possible. I think that you need to go into the mud. You need to explore it. You need to, again, send roots down into it. So bringing your attention into the mud, setting time aside to embrace those feelings, right? Again, I love the idea of putting roots down. So again, we're not trying to get away from, rather we're actually really planting ourselves in it. And I understand that this is a difficult thing to do. I recently, last year, I went through a dark night of the soul. And many of you were with me through that journey. And it was difficult. And knowing everything I know, it was still difficult because that mud, if you will, to keep with my analogy here, of that dark night was really, felt really powerful, felt overwhelming. It felt like I couldn't go on. So interestingly, I found out through that process that it was really kind of a two-step process. And the first step was dealing with the grief. So the dark night came because of the loss of something. So I lost something, I felt this deep grief, and I had to allow myself to grieve, to feel those feelings. And so this is part of what I'm speaking about here, is I needed to feel the grief and also do things to manage it. So ideally, in a perfect world, perhaps, we could just go into the feelings and set down our roots and really deal with the mud, if you will. Embrace the mud. But as I discovered, first I had to sort of distract myself. In a sense, I needed to avoid the mud for a little bit, okay? So if this is kind of like a fresh wound. So if you've just gone through something, if you just lost your job or a relationship, or you got a diagnosis of something, then while ultimately my advice to you is you need to embrace the feelings that come from that experience. You need to be with them. You need to not run away from them. There may be a phase at first where you need to distract yourself a bit. Maybe you need to go out with friends. Maybe you need to binge watch some television. Maybe you need to go do things that you enjoy doing. But sooner or later, it is, in order to really move a step closer to the lotus, to flowering that lotus, there needs to be a stage where the feelings, the sensations are embraced fully, where you set down those roots, you dig into the sensations. And these will be in your body. So it'll be, you know, it could be a tightness in your chest. It could be feeling like your throat is closing up. It could be butterflies in your stomach, or you feel like there's a rock somewhere in your abdomen that you're carrying around with you. It could be any or all of these, or some other sensation in your body, tightness in your shoulders, for instance. So again, these feelings are generally considered unpleasant. We don't like them. And to the animal body that we live in, they signal something is wrong, something is amiss. And from a conventional point of view, we would say, oh, something's wrong out there. I was, I'm being threatened by something. I lost my job, and that threatens my livelihood. That's why I feel this way. So again, this is conventional viewpoint, right? I lost my job, therefore I'm feeling XYZ. And I understand that from a conventional viewpoint, it makes sense. But spirituality is not about conventional viewpoint. It never has been, okay? So if we want to get conventional advice, what do? I lost my job. Oh, go look for another job. Go move in your parents, do whatever. Like, that's not what this channel's about at all. It's not what spirituality is about at all. So from our perspective, you lose your job, that elicits something. It's showing you the mud. It's showing you the mud, okay? And if that were already integrated, you wouldn't be feeling the way you're feeling, or the way you're feeling wouldn't be a problem. But because you're feeling like, oh, there's some problem here, I need to do something, this is showing us that there's some unconsciousness there. And so, again, first step or first stage might be grief or managing things. And, very often this isn't pretty. I mean, it doesn't have to be bad, but you might find yourself drinking a little too much. You might find yourself using. You might find yourself overeating. You might be doing things you'd rather not do. In my case, it wasn't so destructive. I just basically started working more. and I made sure to schedule time to be with friends. So I found being alone during that dark night was really, really scary for me. It was really problematic. So I would make sure to try and schedule something, any free evening that I had, because evenings were particularly tough. And so I would try and schedule something and I would spend time. And so I did that for months, honestly, because it just felt like, again, there was this heaviness, and I would try and go into it and I would try and process it, but I was just not successful. And then one day, something shifted. And I would lay down in my living room, close my eyes. I'd try and make sure that I didn't have a pressing appointment or something that I needed to do, because I needed to enter into a timeless state. I couldn't be sitting there thinking, okay, well, how long is this going to take, or anything like that. And I would lay down, close my eyes, and invite the mud, invite those feelings to come up. And I would, in a sense, plant my awareness into those feelings, those sensations. I would welcome them and really embrace them and be with them. And I wouldn't be sitting there thinking, well, how soon are they going to go away, or I don't like this, or I can't take this, or anything like that. I would simply just be with it. And I would enter into an almost sleep-like state, and I would feel something shift. Okay, something would release after a while. Now, it didn't all release in one session, so I did that. Then the next day it would come back, and I again would lay and be with these sensations, and then they would, again, there would be a shift, and then I would feel better. I'd feel somewhat normal. And I did this, I think, for a week or two, and then it was gone. It was lifted. I felt like my old self again. At this stage on my journey, generally, I feel really happy most of the time. I don't know if happy is the best word, but very peaceful, full of joy. Generally, my baseline, I've talked about this before in other talks, my baseline is very high. So I don't have to like try and be happy or joyful or manipulate myself. Just generally, that's just where I go. Sure, there can be moments where I'm getting pulled down for a moment, but generally pretty high, natural sort of baseline state. This is opposed to how I used to be, which was basically the opposite. I would feel really poorly most of the time. This is when I was younger, not during the dark night. So I would feel pretty poor, and then like something good might happen and I would feel better for a minute, and then I would go back to feeling pretty poor again. I don't mean poor as in not wealthy. I mean poor as in poorly. I just felt bad. My energy level, my mood, I was basically like in a depressed state. So it's night and day, really. And it's taken spiritual work and living with spiritual principles to get to this point. And this is why the Dark Night of the Soul was such a surprise, because I didn't even realize that I could experience that level of darkness and sustained feeling of, feeling off, feeling bad. I didn't even know that was possible anymore. So that definitely taught me something. And I knew from my own training, my own teaching, and my own experience that I must have been resisting something, that there must be, this was bringing up again the mud. It was showing me the mud, There's something that I had not looked at or integrated that was being shown to me through this experience. And it was so intense that, again, at first, it was like, you know, almost like the sun, like you just can't look at it. And so if that's where you are with something, then I say, okay, you know, that's all right. It's understandable. You don't want to blind yourself looking at the sun. Rather, take a moment, give yourself some time. Again, allow yourself to do what you need to do. This is something one of my teachers calls external resourcing. So external resourcing is when we're not handling something spiritually, inwardly. We're instead trying to manipulate things. So again, that could be alcohol, it could be drugs, it could be social media, it could be socializing, it could be any number of things. Some of them are very, very harmful. You know, we can die if we do too much, say overdosing on drugs. And then some of them feel fairly harmless, like you know, eating sweets or, you know, overeating comfort food or something like that. We may not even overeat. We might just feel like, oh, I want this meal because I feel like it will comfort me, make me feel better. It doesn't have to be harmful to be external resourcing. As I said, what I did was I started working more so I could stay busy. And then again, I socialized. I made sure to fill my calendar with social activities so that that darkness that was, it felt overwhelming. And I did not feel like I could access it in a deeper way. I just had to sort of keep that at bay for a while. Then, when the time was right, I laid down and surrendered to it. And it was transformative. It is very, very powerful to do that. And that ultimately is what allowed the dark night to lift. But this takes us back to sort of the main gist of today's talk. No mud, no lotus. Okay? We want enlightenment. We want the freedom of enlightenment. We want to live the most full expression of a human life, and yet we're still avoiding the fuel, if you will. The mud at the bottom of the lake is the fuel. That is what gives the lotus its nutrients. That is what allows the lotus to grow and to bloom. So again, are you running away from the very thing that would free you? Are you trying to avoid the mud in your own life? And again, there are many ways of doing this, from very harmful and obvious to very, very subtle, very small, and seemingly innocuous. But again, this is what many of us are generally trying to do on a day-to-day basis. I don't like how I feel, and so how do I change it? How do I get rid of it? In other words, oh, there's some mud. How do I get away from the mud? But we will never have the lotus unless we're willing to plant the seed and the roots into the mud and let it grow from there. Okay, so this is a big thing that I try and emphasize in my teaching. At some point, you need to really allow yourself to feel what you're feeling, everything that you're feeling, the good, the bad, the ugly, the pleasant, the unpleasant. Okay, so plant those roots, embrace the mud, and grow your lotus. All right, everyone, as usual, I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, please reach out. And you can help me out by commenting, liking, subscribing, and sharing, or by going over to Patreon and becoming a patron and helping to support the community that creates these talks. Until next time, everyone, namaste, and have a beautiful, beautiful day.